They were talking about me in the kitchen, my son and my daughter at my grandson's graduation party, and they didn't know I was standing in the hallway with a bowl of potato salad in my hands. "Don't stress about the deposit," my son said. "Just hit the ATM. He grumbles, but he always pays. That's what he's for." The ATM. That's what I was behind my back. Not Dad. Not Earl. A machine in a hallway that spits out money if you push the right buttons. And they had been pushing them, I would later add it up to the exact dollar, for 18 years. So I did the one thing nobody ever expects a machine to do. Quietly, politely, without one word of warning, I shut down. And here's the part they never saw coming, the part that makes this story worth your evening. I wasn't just any ATM. I spent 42 years behind the counter of the savings bank in this town, the last 25 of them running it. I have approved loans and I have called loans. I know exactly how money moves, how it hides, and how it talks, and my family had forgotten all of that because they had stopped seeing a banker. They'd stopped seeing a man at all. There's a green ledger book sitting on my desk right now that they didn't know existed, and by the end of this story you'll know what's written in it, and so will they. So pull up a chair, friend, and get comfortable, because I want to tell this one slowly. My name is Earl. I'm 77 years old, and this is a story about the difference between being generous and being convenient. I started at Farmers and Merchants Savings in the spring of 1972, 22 days after my Army discharge, in a suit my mother pressed and shoes my father shined at the kitchen table the night before, because that's what fathers did then instead of saying things. Teller window number 3. Mr. Whitcomb hired me, a tall, dry man who wore the same gray cardigan for 30 years and knew the balance of every account in town to the penny, and never once, in all the years I knew him, told a soul any of it. First morning, he walked me to my window and gave me the whole of my training in 4 sentences. He said, "Earl, count it twice. Look them in the eye. Never lend what you can't afford to call a gift, and never gift what buys you contempt." I was 23. I wrote the first 3 down. It took me 50 years to understand the 4th one, and this whole story, when you boil it down to the bones, is about sentence number 4. The bank sat on the corner of Main and Elm, marble counter worn into shallow dishes where 100 years of elbows had rested, and I gave it my whole working life. Teller, head teller, loan officer, branch manager by 1989. And I'll tell you what a small-town banker actually is, because the movies get it wrong. He's not the villain in the vest foreclosing on widows. He's the man who knows everything and says nothing. I knew which marriages were in trouble a year before the neighbors did, because the accounts separate before the people do. I knew which farmers were lying awake, because they'd started coming in on Tuesdays instead of Fridays. I carried this town's secrets the way Whitcomb taught me, in a locked drawer behind my face, and I sat across the desk from my own neighbors, men I bowled with, and told them yes when I could and no when I had to. And here's the thing about a good no, friend, the thing my own children never learned because I never taught them. A good no, said early and said plain, is a kindness. It's the yes men who ruin people. I met Joanie at that bank. She worked the drive-up window and I worked inside, and the drive-up in those days ran on pneumatic tubes, those brass canisters that went wumping through the pipes. And for one whole autumn, 1974, the prettiest girl I'd ever seen, and I conducted a courtship entirely through interoffice envelopes riding those tubes. Deposit slips with extra lines on the back. Coffee Saturday. She still has the first one somewhere. When I finally proposed, 2 years later, I did it by canister, sent the ring itself thumping around the building in a brass tube, which the branch security manual absolutely forbade, and Mr. Whitcomb looked over his glasses at the whole operation and said, "I'll allow it once." We were married in 1977. 2 kids, a boy and a girl. A house on Cherry Street that we paid off in 19 years, because bankers who have seen what debt does to sleep pay their houses off early. Scott came in 1978, Dana in 1981, and I want to stop here and do something the fellows in my situation usually skip, which is to tell you honestly what kind of father I was, because if I paint myself the plain, honest hero of this story, the ending won't teach you anything, and I didn't sit down on this porch tonight to waste your time. I was at that bank 6 days a week. Saturdays were half days, supposedly, but a branch manager's half day is a whole day with an apology attached. I missed ball games. I missed a school play I said I'd make, and I can still tell you the date, because Dana, 8 years old, kept my program on her nightstand for a month, folded to the page with her name on it. I was the man providing. That's the story I told myself. Same story every man of my generation told himself. And it's even mostly true, and it also mostly doesn't matter, because a kid can't hug a story. Joanie raised them is the truth of it, and I showed up at supper with the days whether still on my face. And somewhere in there, without ever deciding to, I started doing my loving in the one language I was fluent in. Money. New bikes that appeared after missed weekends. The best skates in the county after a forgotten recital. I never once said sorry out loud, I don't think, not in 20 years of small failures. But I paid sorry. I paid it fluently, and my children, who were smart children, learned exactly what a withdrawal was and exactly which buttons brought one. If they grew up thinking of their father as a machine that dispenses, friend, I have to own my share of it. I installed the buttons myself. And here's a detail that I didn't understand was a confession until I said it out loud on this porch just now. The one game I always had time for, the one thing I never once begged off of, was when they were small and we played bank. Sunday afternoons. Dana, 7 years old, in my good hat behind a card table, stamping deposit slips with a potato stamp Joanie carved, and Scott running in from the yard to apply for outrageous loans, a rocket, a horse, half the loans in crayon, and me in my shirt sleeves playing the examiner, teaching them to count it twice and look the customer in the eye. They fought over who got to work the window. Joanie has a photograph of it, Dana's little face solemn as a deacon under that hat. I framed it for my office and it sat by my blotter for 30 years, and customers would say, "Your kids." And I'd say, "My staff." It was the best hour of my week, most weeks. It never once occurred to me, not in 30 years of looking at that photograph, that the only world I'd ever fully invited my children into had a counter running down the middle of it, and money on the table, and their father on the far side. They came to me the only way I'd ever taught them to, through the window. Scott grew up charming. Charming the way weather is, genuinely, it just happens off him. He can't help it and doesn't have to try, and it has been the great misfortune of his life, because nothing that comes that easy ever gets built on. He's had, and Joanie and I counted once on the Zephyr, but I'm getting ahead of myself, 11 business ventures since 1999. A frozen yogurt franchise. A vape kiosk in the mall, which I financed against my own judgment and Whitcomb's fourth sentence both. A dropshipping thing I never understood. Some cryptocurrency months we do not discuss at Christmas. A food truck that served exactly 4 festivals. Every one of them started with a presentation at my kitchen table, glossy folders, Scott's beautiful confidence filling the room like brass music, and every one of them ended the same way, quietly, no autopsy. The folder just stopped being mentioned, and somewhere in the middle there was always a bridge loan from Dad. Bridge loans, he called them. In 42 years of banking, I never once saw a bridge that only had one end, but I kept writing them. Dana grew up watchful. Married Kyle in 2005, a steady enough fellow, sells insurance, and they moved into a suburb where the mailboxes all match and the mortgages all grown. And Dana's asks were never brass music like her brother's. They were quiet, reasonable, always for the kids, and that's what made them impossible to refuse. Travel soccer for Ben, the orthodontist. the school trip to Washington, a $400 monthly transfer that started in 2014, the year I retired, for the kids' activities that was going to be temporary. And you know that word by now if you've been listening to my stories. Temporary is the hardest working word in the English language. That transfer ran 144 months. I did say no once in all those years. I want that in the record. Venture number 8, 2016, a trampoline park, and Scott needed a co-signature on a lease, an actual legal instrument, my name and everything I'd built pledged against a building full of other people's children bouncing on other people's ankles. 42 years of banking stood up in me and said the good plain no early like Whitcomb taught. And I want you to hear what it cost, because this is the tuition my children charged me for the lesson. That Christmas, the phone calls thinned to nothing. Thanksgiving was suddenly at Kyle's mother's, both families so sorry logistics. The grandkids' school concert came and went and nobody sent the date until after. Nothing you could point to in a courtroom, friend. Frost doesn't leave fingerprints. It went on into February, right up until Dana's transmission gave out and the phone rang and I paid and the sun came out and everyone was warm again and the message was filed where I couldn't pretend not to see it. The no had a price and the yes had a coupon, so I stopped saying no. You want to know how a machine gets built, 1 February at a time. And I paid it all. That's the part you have to sit with, same as I had to. Nobody defrauded me. Nobody forged a check. Every dollar walked out the door with my own 2 hands on it, and I want to tell you why, because it wasn't stupidity, and the fellows my age listening tonight already know what it was. Every ask was a visit. Every crisis was a phone call, and the phone doesn't ring much on Cherry Street otherwise, once the grandkids got phones of their own and lives to go with them. When Scott needed a bridge, Scott came over, sat in my kitchen, drank my coffee, asked about my tomatoes. When Dana needed the orthodontist, we got Sunday dinner and the grandkids' laughter in the house for an afternoon. I knew the arithmetic, friend, don't you think I didn't? 42 years a banker, of course I knew. I was buying visits. I was a lonely retired man running the world's most expensive social calendar, and the worst of it is it worked, and when a thing works, you stop asking what it costs. Joanie saw it before I did. Joanie always sees it before I do. She'd say, sometimes in the dark, Earl, when's the last time either of them called with nothing on the other end of it? And I'd say something like, that's just how it is now, everybody's busy, and roll over. You can sleep next to the truth for years, friend. It doesn't snore. It just waits. And so we come to the 5th of June, last year, and my grandson Ben's graduation party, in Dana's backyard with the matching mailboxes and a bowl of potato salad. Joanie made the potato salad, same recipe her mother carried out of Indiana, and I was ferrying it from the truck to the kitchen, and the kitchen has one of those layouts where the hallway comes in blind from the garage side. And I want to be fair to them, the way I'd want somebody to be fair to me. They didn't know I was there. People say things behind backs they'd never say to fronts, and there's a mercy in not knowing most of it. And I got my mercy revoked at 77, standing on my daughter's runner rug, holding a bowl with both hands. It was Scott's voice first. Loose, easy, a man at a party. He was talking to Kyle about the event space, venture number 12. There's a deposit due on a building out by the highway, $12,000, and Kyle, to his credit, and remember I said this later, Kyle said, 12 grand, Scott, where's that coming from? And my son laughed and said it. Don't stress about the deposit. Just hit the ATM. He grumbles, but he always pays. You know what he's for. And then my daughter's voice, my watchful girl, my folded program girl, not objecting, laughing. And adding, the way you top somebody's joke at a party. Just make sure you go through mom first. Dad's the ATM, but mom knows the PIN. Kyle didn't laugh. I'll enter that in the record too. But nobody objected either, and the talk moved on to the venue's parking situation. and I stood in that hallway and had one of those moments where the whole picture reorganizes itself at once, like when you finally see the second face in the optical illusion and then can't unsee it. 18 years of visits, reorganized. Every kitchen table folder, every Sunday dinner, every grandkid hug timed to a transfer date, refiled in a single second under a new account name. And the thing I felt first, before the hurt even landed, the thing I'm still a little ashamed of, was a banker's cold professional embarrassment. Because I had seen this account 100 times in my career. The soft touch, the family mark, the man everyone in the file knows will always pay. I had sat across marble counters from that man for 40 years and pitied him, and here I was holding his potato salad. I didn't make a scene. If you've listened to this porch before, you know none of us ever do. We're not scene makers, my generation, we're quiet leavers. I set the bowl on the counter, said the party was lovely, kissed Ben's forehead and told him I was proud. And that part was true and is still true and will always be true. And I drove home the long way, past the bank, which is a phone store now. God help us all, marble counters and all. And I sat in the truck across from it for a while with the engine off. And sitting there, looking at the phone store that used to hold my whole life, I thought about Chester Aldous, for the first time in maybe 20 years. Aldous farmed 600 acres north of town, good dirt, paid like a metronome, and he had 2 boys in the city who loved him by telephone. And over about a decade at my own marble counter, I watched that man draw his life down in slices. Equipment loan for a son's restaurant. Second mortgage for the other one's divorce. Every visit, he'd stand at my window making it sound like his own idea. They've just had some bad luck, Earl, and I was young and I said yes sir and counted it twice. Whitcomb called me into his office after one of those withdrawals and stood at the window with his coffee and said, "You know what we're watching, don't you? We're watching a man being eaten by spoons. No bites. Nobody ever takes a bite, just spoons, and everyone at the table swearing they barely touched it. Aldous died in a rented room over the implement dealer friend. The farm went at auction to pay what the restaurant and the divorce had borrowed, and both boys came back for the funeral in good suits and stood at the graveside doing arithmetic. You could see it on their faces. I had helped count that man out of his own life, one polite Tuesday at a time, and I'd sworn at 26 it would never be me. And now I was 72, parked across from a phone store, holding the same spoon-fed ledger in my chest. The difference, the only difference, was that I knew how the books worked. Aldous never stood a chance. I did. I didn't tell Joanie for 2 days, not to protect her, because saying it out loud made it real, and I wanted 2 more days in the old world where I was a father instead of a machine. I know you understand that. Whoever you are, wherever you're listening from tonight, I know you understand paying for 2 more days. When I did tell her on this porch Wednesday evening, I did it flat, the way I'd deliver a denied application, both quotes, word for word, his and hers. And I watched my wife's face do something I'd only seen once before at her mother's funeral. It went through the hurt fast, too fast, and settled somewhere else, somewhere quieter and older. And she was silent so long the crickets got loud, and then Joanie said, "Earl, I'm going to tell you something I should have told you 2 years ago. I've heard the ATM thing before. Thanksgiving, when I was carrying pies out to the freezer in the garage. I heard it and I came back in and put candles on a pumpkin pie and said nothing, because I decided you couldn't bear it. That was wrong of me. But the pin," she stopped, and her hands were flat on her apron pressing it down. "The pin is new. Our daughter thinks I'm a keypad, Earl. She's been punching me in a pattern all these years and I thought it was love. And then my wife of 48 years, the drive-up girl, the canister girl, looked out at the yard and said the sentence that this whole story turns on. She said, well, machines have an off switch. Find ours. But before we found it, my wife did something that leveled me all over again. She went inside and came back out with the coffee tin from the top of the pantry, her quilting money, 40 years of pin money and fair prizes and egg and craft cash. The tin I have teased her about since the Carter administration. And she set it on the porch rail and confessed her own ledger. The 400 she'd slipped Dana for a dress for some gala of Kyle's firm's, Don't Tell Your Father. The bus tickets twice, for Scott, in the bad cryptocurrency winter. Birthday money to the grandkids that was really grocery money for their parents, marked as birthday so it didn't count. 15 years, near as she could figure, of small quiet cash moving under the table our whole family sat at, because Joanie had been running the same bank I had, friend, just out of a coffee tin in the currency of Don't Tell. And we sat there in the dark with my accounts and her tin between us, two old bankers at the end of an examination, and she said, "We did this together, you know. You with the checkbook and me with the tin, and both of us calling it love and neither of us checking the arithmetic. I'm not confessing so you'll feel better, Earl. I'm confessing so we shut it all down. Both windows, same day." Now I want to explain what I did next, and just as important, what I didn't do, because this is where my particular resume comes into it, and where I might actually earn my keep as your storyteller tonight. A hurt man burns bridges. A banker closes lines of credit. They are not the same operation. Nothing I did in the next 2 weeks was revenge, whatever my children said about it later. Revenge is loud. What I performed was an orderly wind-down of an overextended facility, and I performed it the way Whitcomb would have, with clean paperwork and no adjectives. First, the automatic transfer, the temporary one, 144 months old. Canceled, one phone call, 4 minutes, the girl at the credit union didn't even ask why. 144 months to build and 4 minutes to stop. Money's like that in both directions, remember it. Second, the card. Years back, I'd put Scott on one of my accounts as an authorized user for gas. During venture number 6, strictly temporary, there's our word again. That card had been breathing quietly in his wallet for more years than I care to admit. I watched the statements the way you watch weather, and told myself the streaming services and the gas and the odd 200 at the sporting goods were cheaper than an argument. Cancelled. Reported reissued, new number, done. Third, and pay attention, because this is the one nobody thinks of. I called Gil Hanratty, my lawyer, and had him refresh every document in the drawer. Will, powers of attorney, the works, all current, all witnessed, all very much reflecting a man in full command of his faculties, and I had Gil note my reasoning in his file in my own words. Because, friend, I had been on the other side of this desk. I knew, the way you know weather from a certain kind of sky, exactly what gets suggested about a generous old man the first season the generosity stops. Remember I said this. It'll come back around before we're done. And fourth, I got out the green ledger. They gave it to me at my retirement dinner, last cloth-bound ledger from the bank's last paper year, meant as a keepsake, a joke almost. It had sat in my desk drawer for a decade with nothing in it. Well, I filled it. It took me 9 evenings at the kitchen table with 4 boxes of old statements and canceled checks and my own memory, which is unfortunately excellent, and when I was done I had it all. Every bridge loan, every deposit, every orthodontist and venue and vape kiosk and temporary transfer, dated, itemized in a banker's hand in blue ink. Column for repayments too. You build a column even when you know what's going in it. That's discipline. The repayment column, 18 years long, had one entry. Scott, 2011, $60, and I only remember why. It was my birthday, and he was flush from something, and he put 3 20s in my shirt pocket at my own party, loud so people saw, and called us even on the yogurt money. The yogurt money was $9,000. Total at the bottom of the last page, double underlined, because Whitcomb taught me you double underline a final figure. $214,600. And change, but a man leaves the change off when he says it out loud, or people think he's bitter about the change. $214,600. A house. A paid-off house, walking around out there in the world, wearing venture folders and orthodontia and matching mailboxes. I showed Joanie the final figure and she looked at it a long time and all she said was, and the visits weren't even real. That's the line item that doesn't fit in a ledger, friend. I left a blank page at the back for it anyway. Then we sat back, the two of us, and did the hardest thing in banking. Nothing. You don't announce a closed line. You let the next draw request discover it. While we waited, we rehearsed. I'm not embarrassed to tell you that, though I suppose it's a strange picture. Two people in their 70s on a porch swing, practicing one syllable. Because here's what nobody tells you about no. If it comes out hot, they've got you, your emotional dad will circle back. If it comes out apologetic, they've got you twice. An apology is a crack and a crack is a handle. It has to come out level like a posted rate, like the machine itself would say it. Insufficient funds, no rage in it, no sorrow, just the fact of the screen. So Joanie played Scott, and I'll tell you, she was frightening. She had the brass music down cold. Dad, this one's the one, I can feel it. And the first 4 rehearsals I cracked. I heard my own voice start explaining, justifying an explanation. Whitcomb used to say is the beginning of approval. By the 6th run I had it. No, son, that won't be possible. Period, full stop. Nothing trailing after it for a charming man to grab. Joanie broke character and looked at me a moment and said, there he is. There's the man from window 3. I'd been wondering where he was. It took 11 days. Scott called on a Tuesday evening, brass music, tomatoes, the weather, and then, so listen, the venue thing's moving. They need the deposit by Friday, $12K, and honestly it's the last raise I'll ever need, this one's the one. And I said the sentence I had practiced on the porch with Joanie until I could say it level. I said, no, son, that won't be possible. And then, and this is the discipline, this is 42 years of marble counter, I said nothing else. Silence is the machine's native language. Let the customer read the screen. He laughed at first, thought I was doing a bit. Then he ran his charm through the slot again, twice, 3 times, each swipe a little faster, and when the screen didn't change, my son's voice did. And I heard the sound underneath the brass for the first time in years, and it was fear, plain fear, and 18 years of my own foolishness kept me from enjoying it even a little. He said, Dad, after everything, and I finally interrupted gently. After everything what, son? Finish the sentence. Tell me what's on your side of the ledger. And the phone went so quiet I could hear his kitchen clock. He hung up saying I'd changed, that Mom would hear about this, which was true. She was sitting across from me holding my other hand, and that I'd regret it when the event space blew up. Friend, the event space is a mattress outlet now. I checked last month. I'm only human. Dana came in person 4 days later, and Dana is the smarter of my children, so she didn't bring an ask. She brought concern. Sat in my kitchen, turned her mug in her hands, and worked her way to it. Ben's tuition, the state college, there was a gap this semester, $2,200, and with things so tight, and here her eyes did something practiced, she hated to even ask. Now I would walk through fire for that boy. So here is exactly what I said. I said, sweetheart, nobody with my last name will ever go without schooling while I'm above ground. I'll call the bursar Monday and pay the gap directly. Directly, I said, to the college. And I watched my daughter's face very carefully, because a banker learns faces the way a farmer learns sky, and what moved across it was not relief. It was recalculation. I called the bursar Monday. You know what's coming, and I let you get here ahead of me on purpose because I needed you to feel it arrive the way I did, standing at my kitchen phone with my reading glasses on. There was no gap. Fall semester, paid in full the week registration opened. Partial scholarship, the rest handled. That boy owed his college nothing, and his mother had sat in my kitchen with a number, 2200, specific as a hymn, and a face that hated to even ask. 18 years, friend, and I had never once verified. Not one invoice, not one orthodontist, not one Washington trip. Bankers verify. It's the spine of the whole trade, and I'd left my spine at the office because verifying your own daughter feels like a sin. Well, I sat down that Monday with my green ledger and a highlighter and my excellent unfortunate memory, and I went back through 18 years flagging every entry I'd taken purely on faith and could now check against something. I'll spare you the full audit. I'll give you the finding, as we used to write at the bottom of examination reports. A material percentage of the facility was drawn against purposes that did not exist. The orthodontist retired in 2019. There's an entry in 2021. I didn't rage. I want you to notice that, not because I'm proud, but because by then I'd understood something that took the anger's legs out from under it. They didn't think of it as stealing from a man. You can't steal from a machine. Machines don't have money, they just hold it. Getting cash out of an ATM isn't theft, it's savvy. My children had not raised themselves to see me this way, friend. I'd been depositing that lesson nightly since 1978 in the language of guilt at the going rate. They were fluent because I'd paid the tuition. That thought didn't excuse a single entry in the ledger. But it moved my anger off of them alone and made it share a bench with me. And that, I think, is the only reason this story gets to have the ending it has instead of the one you'd see on the television. The intervention came in September. That's not my word for it, it's theirs. I heard Dana use it in the driveway. They arrived together, Sunday afternoon, unannounced, Scott and Dana and even Kyle, trailing, looking like a man attending a meeting he'd voted against. Joanie put out coffee because Joanie would put out coffee for the end of the world. And they sat in my living room and did the thing I'd told Gil Hanratty was coming. Dad, we're worried about you. You've been making sudden financial decisions, cutting people off, changing accounts. That's not like you. Aunt Ruthie's neighbor had a thing and it started exactly this way, personality changes around money. We think, and we're saying this with love, we think you should see somebody. Get evaluated. And Dana, my watchful girl, laid a brochure on my coffee table, soft blue, sailboat on it, a memory care assessment center up in the city, and patted it twice, the way you pat a thing you've decided. The room got very still. Joanie's cup stopped in the air, and I saw 48 years of Indiana patience leave my wife's face all at once, and I caught her eye and gave her the smallest shake of my head. Because I'd been waiting for this meeting for 2 months, and I had prepared for it the way I prepared for bank examinations, which is to say completely, and with a certain terrible joy. I said, that's fair, memory's important. Let's test mine right now. And I went to the desk and came back with the green ledger and I sat down across from my children and I opened it to page 1 and I began to read aloud. Flat. No adjectives. The way you read minutes into a record. March 2007, frozen yogurt franchise, Scott, 9,000. I read for 11 minutes by the mantel clock. Nobody stopped me. Nobody could. The numbers kept coming like weather, like a statement cycle, 70-some entries, and I watched my children age in front of me as the total assembled itself in the room. And Kyle, somewhere in year 12 of the recitation, put his face in his hands, and I understood and confirmed later that easily half of Dana's entries he had never heard of in his life. When I reached the bottom of the last page, I read the final figure, double underlined, and then the repayment column, both parts, Scott, 2011, $60, and then I closed the book, and I looked up, and I said, my memory's fine. It's yours I'd worry about. You seem to have forgotten who I was for 42 years. And then I told them how it was going to be, and this part I'd rehearsed with Joanie, because it mattered to us both that it come out as terms and not as temper. I said, the bank is closed. It closed in June in a hallway at a graduation party, and if you want to know the exact moment, ask the potato salad. But hear the rest. Your mother and I are not closed. Education, paid direct to the school always. Medicine always. A true wolf at a true door always verified because verification is respect, and I'll be extending you the same respect I extended strangers at that counter for 4 decades. What's ended is the other thing, the convenience. And the next person who slides a sailboat brochure across my coffee table had better have first repaid their column in this book, because until then, friend, you're not a creditor of my competence. You haven't got the standing. Kyle apologized before they left, alone on the porch, man to man, and shook my hand and held on an extra second, and whatever happens in that marriage, and things I gather have been rearranging over there since the ledger reading, I'll always credit him the handshake. Scott went dark for 5 months. It hurt, I won't pretend otherwise, but I've learned the difference now between missing someone and missing the sound of your own usefulness, and I did my grieving honestly. And in February, a photograph arrived on my phone from a number I'd almost taken off the favorites. It was a paycheck stub. My son, 48 years old, on a W-2 at a building supply outfit, running their contractor desk, and friend, of course that's where he'd shine. He's been selling all his life. He just never once done it standing on somebody else's floor, showing up at 7, wearing the vest. Under the photograph he'd typed one line. No withdrawal request attached. Just wanted you to see it. I sat in the truck and looked at that stub for a long while. It's not an apology. It's better. It's a deposit. First one in the repayment column in 14 years, and it isn't money. Dana took longer and hers cost more, the way it always costs more when you're the watchful one and the account books of your own marriage and your own pride get opened in a living room. But in March, an envelope came in the mail, real mail, her handwriting. Inside was $200 and a note that said, first payment. I'm told there are 172 more to come. She'd done the arithmetic on her column, my girl. She'd sat down and done her own audit. And at the bottom, below her name, a line that took the wind clean out of me. It said, I remembered the program from the school play the other day. I guess I've been leaving things on nightstands for you my whole life, waiting for you to find them. Call me when you get this, not about the money. I called. We talked for 2 hours, the first conversation in 18 years with no number in it anywhere, and some of it was hard. Her Saturdays at that bank as a girl, waiting on a father who kept a whole town's secrets and none of his evenings, and some of it I had coming, and I took it the way you take medicine, all the way down. And then we talked about Ben and her garden and nothing, glorious nothing, 45 minutes of nothing, and when we hung up Joanie didn't ask how it went. She'd been listening to my half from the kitchen, pretending to dry the same dish. The dish was dry, friend. The dish had been dry for an hour. She came out in person in April alone and asked to see the ledger, not to dispute it, to sit with it. And we did something at that kitchen table that I expect very few fathers and daughters ever do. We went through 18 years line by line, and she initialed the entries she remembered and marked the ones she didn't. And twice she stopped cold at her own arithmetic. I forgot this one entirely. Dad, this one paid for the deck. We told people Kyle's bonus paid for the deck. It took 3 hours and 2 pots of coffee, and there was crying in the middle of it, hers and some of mine, and by the end we had done the thing the trade calls reconciliation, which I have always thought was the only word banking ever borrowed from church and returned in better condition. At the door she stopped and said, You know what's strange? I feel lighter owing you honestly than I ever felt taking it for free. And I said, Sweetheart, that's not strange. That's the oldest fact I know. Debts you can see have edges. It's the invisible ones that eat the whole farm. She didn't know about Chester Aldous. I'll tell her someday. Or I suppose she'll hear it on a Friday night, same as you did. And Ben, I saved Ben for last on purpose, because the boy is the interest on this whole account. In October, my grandson called me himself, his own number, and I braced, I'm ashamed to say, force of habit for the ask. And Ben said, Grandpa, can I come by Fridays? Before you say yes, it's not for money. And he got embarrassed, 19 years old, I could hear him going red through the phone. Nobody ever taught me how any of it works. Money. Mom and Uncle Scott, no offense, but I've watched it my whole life and I don't want to end up. He stopped himself and rerouted, polite boy. I just figure you're the only one I know who actually knows. He comes Fridays. The first Friday, I set $100 on the kitchen table in tens, and we did the oldest lesson there is, pay yourself first. The 10th 10 goes in the tin before the world gets its hands on the other 9. And we did compound interest with a calculator, and then without one, because a man should feel the doubling in his own pencil. And Ben watched 40 years of growth assemble itself down a sheet of paper and said, quietly, that's it. That's the whole secret. It's just starting early and not stopping. And I said, that's the whole secret, and nobody believes it because it's boring, and everything that actually works is boring, marriage included. Don't tell your grandmother. And then my grandson looked at the sheet a while longer and asked the question I'd been bracing for since June, except it wasn't the one I'd braced for. He said, Grandpa, why didn't anyone teach my mom this? And there it was, friend, served level, no malice in it, a 19-year-old's plain audit question, and it deserved a plain answer, so I gave it one. I said, because her teacher was too busy at the bank teaching strangers, and by the time he looked up, the only lessons she'd learned at home were which buttons worked. I'm not skipping you the way I skipped her. That's not a favor, son. That's a correction. We run matched savings now, posted terms, both signatures, because that's not an ATM, friend, that's a bank, and the difference is the whole sermon. A machine dispenses. A bank believes in things on purpose, out loud with paperwork. Last month I gave him the brass canister, the pneumatic one, the very one the ring rode around in 1976, Joanie's idea. He keeps his savings passbook in it on his dorm shelf. Tells the story to his roommates better than I tell it. Apparently there's a girl who's heard it twice. And in May, Joanie and I took the trip. The Zephyr, sleeper car, Chicago clean through to the coast, the one we deferred through 48 years of other people's emergencies. We sat up half of one night in the observation car crossing the Rockies in the moonlight, doing our own audit, the good ledger, the one with the drive-up window in it and the wedding and the porch, and somewhere over the continental divide my wife put her head on my shoulder and said, you know what I like best? The phone hasn't rung in 4 days. And it hadn't. And here's the thing I noticed, riding through the mountains with my off switch found and flipped. I didn't miss the ringing. I missed nothing at all. It turns out when the machine shuts down, whatever's left standing there in the dark, breathing, holding a bowl of potato salad, that's the man. And the man is doing fine. So that's the story. If you take one thing tonight from an old banker, take Whitcomb's 4th sentence, the one that took me 50 years. Never gift what buys you contempt. Money is a language, friend, I've said it all my life. And like any language, the grammar is set by whoever speaks it first and oftenest. If every sentence your family has ever heard from you ends in a $sign, don't be surprised when they answer in withdrawals. Post your terms. Keep your ledger, not to throw it at anybody, but because a written thing can't be gaslit, and neither then can you. Say you're good, no early and plain, it's a kindness. And if you've caught yourself buying visits, and some of you have, I heard the quiet just now, stop buying and see who still comes. The ones who come are the estate, friend. Everything else is fixtures. It's evening here now. Ben's passbook got its stamp yesterday, the match is running, and there's a postcard on the icebox from Dana, of all things, a sailboat on it. She picked it on purpose. That girl, payment 5 tucked inside. The crickets are starting up, and Joanie's on the swing with the Indiana quilt, holding my coffee hostage till I finish this. And the porch light's on. It always is. If this story found you somewhere quiet tonight, stay a while. There's a new one on this porch every week, and the light's on for you too. This has been the Porch Light. This story, like all stories told here, is an original work of fiction. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental. Good night, friend. Drive safe going home.